About a year and a half ago, we did a tutorial where we discussed the various export options that you could use when you're exporting or saving your video for the purpose of uploading it to YouTube. And we talked about the various pros and cons of using various settings. In fact, I think we even put up some samples that you could look at yourself and determine for yourself which was the best. But things have changed so much in the last year and a half that I think it's important that we take another look at this. And internet speeds have increased, and so I believe there's new options that we should probably talk about. And perhaps to get started, let's open up YouTube itself and notice together a few things that have changed since the last time we talked about this. One of the main things that I believe that has changed is the size of the file that you are permitted to upload. I think before it was limited to 2 gigabytes. There was kind of a glass ceiling there that even the internet have. It wasn't just YouTube, but there seemed to be a 2 gigabyte limit to uploading materials to the internet, and YouTube was kind of restricted by that. Well, all of that has changed. I believe that the limit now is set to 128 gigabytes, and so no longer do you have to worry about having too large of a file to upload, especially if you are doing some encoding or some compression encoding before you send it up. Okay, the other thing is if you haven't uploaded videos to YouTube in a while, there's no longer a length of video restriction. I believe that when you first sign up, there is a 15-minute restriction, but you can easily unlock that restriction by just assigning your channel to a phone number, and that's something that you can explore and understand as you set up your channel. We won't go into that type of thing in this tutorial. You can perhaps find other tutorials on YouTube that talk about how to set up a YouTube channel if that is something that you're still struggling with. In this tutorial, we want to talk about what type of settings we should use when we export videos from Edius that will look the best on YouTube. And as you look around for any advice on YouTube about this subject, it's a little difficult to discover. YouTube isn't maybe the best in setting up menu systems that make it easy for the producer to understand how to use the best settings. But it is possible to find that. And the way you do it is start your upload. There's a little button up here. And unfortunately, YouTube does change its interface. So by the time you watch this video, the interface may have changed. But look for your upload button, click on it, and you'll notice that there are some menu options below the box that you would use to drop your file into that may be helpful for you as you're trying to understand what settings to use. And here under Upload Instructions, you'll see that you have even more menu options that can help you understand what protocols to follow as you are preparing material and uploading material. The one that we want to understand most specifically for this tutorial is supported YouTube file formats. And here we see a nice, beautiful, long list of file formats that YouTube says that it will work with. However, it's a little deceiving because, for example, if you uploaded a Grass Valley AVI file, it probably would not recognize that. Because in addition to having file formats, you also have a number of different codecs that use this type of file format. And if YouTube doesn't have the particular type of codec that you're using when you make your AVI file, then it's going to give you a nice little error message saying, sorry, we don't understand this file. Try something else. And so don't be thrown off too much by the file formats that are offered here. They're not always going to work. However, we're here to help you out with that. As you're exporting from Edius, we'll show you what you can do to get a file that YouTube will recognize and be able to display. However, there's actually more information that you can find here at YouTube that is actually more detailed and advanced, more specific as to what file format they recommend on sending these days. And it's kind of hidden here under encoding settings. For more advanced information, it says, on file formats, click here. And here's where we get a nice, beautiful page on the recommended settings that you can try. You'll notice that the one that they seem to like the most is a container of MP4. And they recommend a video codec of H.264. They talk about recommended frame rates. They like the video to be progressive, if possible. And when we go to do our first export from our timeline, we're going to follow these settings here, and we'll show you how you can do that in Edius. Okay, so let's go back to Edius. We've got an in and out set, so we can hit our F11 key. And in order to create a video, according to the highly recommended settings of YouTube, we'll choose this option here, the H.264. This will give us the compression that YouTube is recommending. It will also create this video in an MP4 container, just like YouTube is recommending. And so it should, in theory, be the most optimal possible export that we can use out of Edius for YouTube. Now, as we look at our options over here, after we've clicked on H.264, we get another list of 4 possible options. One is F4V, which is flash video, and the second one is the H.264 that we're looking for. So let's double click on that, and that'll open up a second dialog box where we can give it a file name. Let's call this one H.264, and we'll say at 25. And what we mean by that is we're going to try using a setting here that's the kind of the standard for high definition video, 25,000 megabits per second. And we can change that here under average. We'll set it up to 25 megabits per second. And as we take a look at, let's go back to our little post here, we see that they recommend it to be a high profile, 2 consecutive B frames, closed GOP, CAB-AC, and variable bit rate, and chroma subsampling. Well, we're not sure that we're actually going to be able to set all of these settings, but there's a lot that we can choose back here. First of all, the profile is going to be high. Notice your options are main and high. We're going to choose high according to the recommended settings. Now, YouTube recommended that we used variable bit rate. However, that is probably not the best option, at least out of Edius. When you use this option out of Edius, what can happen is, especially if you're dissolving up from black, that first second or two can be very blocky as Edius attempts to choose the bit rate that it thinks that it should use for black video. And it will take that 25,000 bits per second way down because it thinks, well, we don't need too much for black. And as you dissolve from black up to your first shot, it can be very blocky. And so the recommended setting of YouTube here may not be the best. What we could do is 2 samples and see just visually the difference. Let's do one at CBR first. And what that is a constant bit rate. That means that every frame of your output is going to be at 25,000 megabits per second. All right, and quality, let's take this right up to superfine. And the AAC is the recommended format for YouTube. And however, I don't believe it's necessary to have 384 kilobits per second for the audio. 256 is going to be plenty. In fact, you could probably even go lower than that. But let's leave it at 256 since we have no limit now on our file size, and internet speeds are so fast that even the large file size go up pretty fast. All right, now let's go to extended settings. We have some more options here that we can set to conform to the recommended settings for YouTube. If you're encoding a video that is at 30 frames per second, this is probably good to leave it at that. For the B frame, we're going to set that at 2 according to the settings. And under entropy coding mode, YouTube recommends the CAB-AC. We can leave the motion estimation precision at quarter and enter at 4 times 4. So I think we're good. But let's change our file name to reflect that we have decided to save this as a constant bit rate as a sample. And let's go ahead and save that. And we're going to export this little section here of a video that I did recently on Myanmar. And this particular section I chose because it has a lot of dissolves in it. And this is where different encoding options really show their colors. It really shows their ability on a dissolve. How does it handle a dissolve? I'm kind of a dissolve freak, and so a lot of my videos have a lot of dissolves in them. And unfortunately, those don't stand up very well to high compression. So our goal here by this tutorial, and as we test out different export settings, is to find the optimal setting that we can put up to YouTube from here on out that will give us the best results. And remember, we're no longer limited to our file size or to our video length. And so we can throw anything we like pretty much at YouTube. In fact, if we go back to their recommended settings and we scroll down a little bit, we'll see that they are now saying that for high quality uploads for creators with enterprise quality internet connections, you can actually upload or encode your videos at 50,000 kilobits per second. And the one that we're encoding right now is only at 25,000. And so we can maybe set that as another option in a separate encode and put them both up, and you can take a look and see, is it worth encoding your video clip at 50,000 and taking the extra time to upload to YouTube? Is it noticeably better? And you'll be able to check that out once these are up. All right, well, I'll probably put you on pause. And I think what I'll do, just for fun and for evaluation purposes, is encode this section of video using maybe 5 or 6 different setting options with H.264 and put them all up. And everybody can take a look for themselves and determine what they think are the most optimal settings using the H.264 that YouTube recommends. And then maybe we'll also put up some from Flash and Windows Media Player just as a point of reference, point of comparison to see how those stand up against the new recommended settings posted here by YouTube. All right, so I'll put you on pause for now while I go ahead and encode this a number of different ways, and we'll post those with notes as to what settings I used for each one. All right, we've finished encoding the H.264 6 different ways. We'll show you what we did in a minute. Before we do that, I want to show you how to export Windows Media, and we can take a look at that as a comparison. Just click on Windows Media, choose the Windows Media video that automatically highlights there, double click on it. And before you export, let's change this to the highest possible bit rate that you're allowed to in Edius, which I believe is 20,000 kbps. Yeah, that's as far as we can go. We'll put it up to the highest image quality possible. We'll move the bit rate up to as high as we can go, which is, I guess, is 192. And we'll leave it in the constant bit rate. All right. I'll go ahead and say the first one and put you on pause while I do the other two. Okay, we're back. We made actually 4 versions of that Windows Media Player video. There's CBR, CBR 2-pass, VBR quality-based, and VBR 2-pass. So I went ahead and did one of each using the highest possible quality that Windows Media Player is providing, at least through Edius, the 20,000. And then I also did 4 varieties of Flash video, and you can get to those also through the H.264, and it shows up here as your first option. Click on that. I set the quality to superfine and the profile at high. And I did 2 versions at 25K, one using the CBR and one using the VBR. And then I also did one at 50K using CBR and VBR. So we're going to put all of these up at YouTube, and everyone will be able to have an opportunity to see how each of these look. Now, to make this easier for you to evaluate, I have set up all 14 samples in a independent playlist on YouTube, and I'll provide a link to that playlist so that you can easily take a look at the 14 different samples there, or the ones that you might be specifically interested in. And something to keep in mind when you're doing your evaluation is to make sure that your video quality settings have been set to HD. I believe by default, many are set at the 480p progressive. And if you're doing your evaluations at that quality of setting, all of the samples might look really bad, blocky and bad transitions between, bad fades, bad dissolves. And you might think that none of these samples are that good. So before you do your evaluations, make sure that you set your video quality settings to 1080p. And that way you'll be able to evaluate what the high definition video is going to look like. Some people might actually be asking, why should we be uploading such high quality videos? Why should we, be taking the time to upload these huge files when most people are just going to look at it in a small window like this? Well, actually, even though people may leave it on this small window setting when they're looking at your videos on a computer, keep in mind that many of the TVs that are being bought today, especially the smart TVs or even the Blu-ray players that people buy that bring in internet channels, will provide or make access to YouTube as a channel. And more today, people are setting up their smart TVs to accept YouTube as a regular channel. And if you're setting up a YouTube channel for your client, it's a good idea to provide your client with the highest possible quality videos, so that way when their constituents or their customers or their viewers go to watch your videos on their YouTube channel on their smart TVs, they're going to see it in a very good quality. If all you're doing is providing very low resolution videos, that's not putting you or your client in the best light. So the real advantage of a YouTube channel right now is that you can send YouTube one file and they will re-encode that one file to 6 different quality settings that people can choose to watch depending on their internet speed. So if they're living in Africa and they don't have a very good internet connection, they can still watch your videos at a very low resolution. But if they're living in a place where they get very high speed connection, connected especially maybe to their smart TV, they will have the option of watching your videos in 1080p high definition. And all you have to do is provide one file and YouTube does the rest. And so today it only makes sense when you're uploading videos to YouTube is to send them one high definition file. And what we've done here by providing you 14 different samples to look at is an opportunity for you to decide what high definition codec, container, and settings you think will be most optimal for your purposes. Now, one other thing to keep in mind when you're doing your evaluations is that the way this video is going to look will vary from computer to computer, or should I say monitor to monitor. Some of the cheaper computer monitors may not play progressive video very well. And so as you watch these video clips, it may look as though it's dropping frames, it's stuttering, it's kind of jittery or jumpy. And that probably has more to do with the video card that's in your computer and the computer monitor screen that you're using more than it says about what YouTube has done to the video. It's not YouTube that has dropped the frames when they re-encoded it. It's probably a result of your particular monitor that you're viewing. I would recommend that as you're doing your evaluations to maybe use an iPad, and that is going to give you a monitor, a screen that will play progressive video very nicely, and that might be the best way that you can judge which type of codec and settings is going to look the best. So with those tips in mind, I'll let you take a look at these different samples and see what works the best for you. Maybe something that would be good to point out to help you make your decision as to what you're going to do is to take a look at the file sizes that each of these 14 settings provided us. Let's take a look at that. So here's all of the 14 files. Let's notice just a couple of things about this. Let's sort on file size, and we'll notice that actually the Windows Media Player version at the VBR that was quality based, and we can see that that's coming in at 766, almost 67 megabytes, getting close to a gigabyte for a video length that is only 1 minute and 24 seconds. So what you're going to need to do is take a look at the sample and determine for yourself whether the quality advantage that you might determine from comparing it with some of the other samples here is that much better that you want to take the extra time it takes to upload such a large file. If you've got a video that's a half hour in length, that could be quite a huge file that you have to upload. And you might have to decide some of this based on your particular internet speeds or your clients if they're doing the uploading. The next highest file size that comes in is the Flash video. That was encoded at 50K using CBR. It shows up at about half a gigabyte. Now, something else to notice is that there's not a lot of difference in file size between files that were encoded using variable bitrate and those encoded using a constant bitrate. They're virtually identical in size. And for my eye, I kind of like the look of a constant bit rate better than a variable bit rate. Now, some of this might be lost in the end when YouTube itself takes your file and re-encodes it using their proprietary codecs. And when they do that, they are probably using the variable bit rate. So some of the quality that you might be gaining by using constant bit rate might be lost in the end because of what YouTube does to it. But from the samples that I've taken a look at myself here, I kind of think that the constant bit rate is doing just a little bit better at especially the dissolves than the variable bit rate when choosing the identical encoding rate. And so I'm going to continue using constant bit rate. Now, one last thing that you might want to compare, let's sort these by name. Let's notice the H.264, because I think I've determined for myself at least that that is probably the best option to use when exporting from Edius and is actually the recommended settings by YouTube. And so for at least my own personal evaluation, I believe I'm going to continue uploading using H.264. Notice the file size difference between the encoding at 25K and 50K. As you look at the two options here, you can see that the file size actually doubles in size when you encode at 50K. And yet, in the end, you can't really notice a big difference in quality when you watch these two videos, one right after the other. And so I believe that for all intents and purposes, it's probably just as well to encode it H.264 at 25 at constant bit rate. And that will give you a fairly manageable file size that you can upload or that your client will upload. All right, but that's just my opinion. I leave it to you to evaluate for yourself as to what settings you think look the best. And hopefully you will find something that works for you as you export your videos from Edius in preparation for uploading to YouTube.